just to add some context, and you and I've never really talked about this, but and I know you weren't there, but I'm just asking you to sort of guess. As far as the way the company looked before Hulk Hogan joined and Hulkamania ran wild. I mean, Sergeant Slaughter and Jimmy Snuka were two of the like marquee talents for the McMahon family, were they not?
Two of the biggest stars in the business, period. Not just New York. Jimmy Snuka and Sergeant Slaughter were two of the like biggest baby faces anywhere in the world. You can throw Andre in there as well, but Jimmy and Sarge were, good God, man. And arguably, I think Sarge had the most mass appeal along with Andre.
Well, I don't think there's much argument for that because he actually starts to make some pretty good money and makes a name for himself outside of wrestling through the G.I. Joe franchise. As a little kid, man, Sergeant Slaughter and G.I. Joe, dude, that was the jam. I had that action figure you're seeing on YouTube. They even had one where it came with like a little tank deal. It was amazing. I was such a big fan of G.I. Joe, the cartoon, and of course the WWF. And boy, this just checked all the boxes for me. You were an adult, of course. What did you think of the G.I. Joe experiment, if you will, with Sergeant Slaughter?
It was a natural fit. And Sergeant Slaughter was the right guy for that because so many kids had already idolized him out of New York and the exposure that the Garden Network and USA Network was getting at the time. Because when Vince started to expand, Sarge was still there. And so Sarge was getting that national exposure, and kids that were wrestling fans now had an action figure of Sergeant Slaughter because that was, look, this was before LJN. And those action figures with Hulk and Iron Sheik and Nikolai, and it was Hillbilly Jim. I think those were the first four. But Sergeant Slaughter was an action figure before that. And Sarge was a guy that they watched on TV as a wrestler. And now he's got his own G.I. Joe. And it's like, oh my God, G.I. Joe and Sergeant Slaughter is a kid. I don't know how it can possibly get any bigger than that. As a kid, for me, we got G.I. Joes and we would make them wrestlers. But it was just like generic G.I. Joe. And then we would like color stuff on them, which really pissed my mom off. But yeah, that was our wrestlers that we could play with. You didn't have a ring, you had to make shit and everything. So
my understanding is that there was like a new G.I. Joe figure every year from like 85 to 89 for Sergeant Slaughter. I know that this predates you, but what do you think the impasse was about when Sergeant Slaughter left the company? Maybe Vince didn't want him to do G.I. Joe, or do you know any of those details? Has that ever?
Yeah, it's money. I mean, it was just straight up money. Sarge wanted to be able to have the G.I. Joe deal and also do WWE. And Vince wanted him to do WWE and felt that if he was going to do G.I. Joe like everybody else, that would go through the WWE. And Sarge didn't feel the same way. So their disagreement was about money and about rights and about licensing and all of those good things. And Sarge felt, as he had done, that he could continue this G.I. Joe franchise and continue to monetize that on his own and didn't need Vince or WWE.
What I think is interesting that I don't know that ever gets discussed, because when I started doing some research on this episode is when it really sort of clicked for me. Almost everyone who had a falling out with the company or Vince personally eventually came back. Whether it was Roddy Piper or Hulk Hogan or the Ultimate Warrior or Bret Hart or whoever.
Bruce Prichard. No.
Bruce Prichard. but I think Sergeant Slaughter might be one of the first ones to have this breakup with Vince and then come back. You're a part of the company when the return happens. How do you remember? I mean, the narrative out there was, hey, he wants to finish his in-ring career and then become a road agent. So that almost sounds like Sarge contacted Vince. This is sort of chicken and the egg, I guess, but do you remember how that came to be? Did Sarge want to come back, or did Vince have an idea to bring Sarge back?
Sarge wanted to come back. Sarge called Vince and his deal with GI Joe was up, and he was looking to, end his career. Wanted to end it there, and it was a very cordial conversation. We all talked about it and thought this great idea, bring him back. But I think I don't think it was me. I want to say it was probably Pat or whoever, but it was how do we bring him back? Sergeant Slaughter, you got Hulk, you got Warrior. Do we need another top babyface like that? And we all talked about what a great heel Sarge was. Tremendous heel. So do you bring him back as a heel? There was a feeling when Sarge left that he could never be a heel again. However, in his heart of hearts, I think that Sarge realized that he, was much better as a heel. Great as babyface. I'm not taking away anything he did as babyface, but Sarge loved being a heel. He truly embraced it.
So, Bruce, I think the timeline lines up where around the same time that Sarge's contract is ending with Hasbro, the WWF is doing their action figure line with Hasbro. Like, I think they're around the same time. We don't normally talk about toy deals and things like that here, but do you remember how that Hasbro deal came together? Because it did feel like a big switch to go from LJN to Hasbro. I didn't grow up with LJNs. I grew up with Hasbro. So that's really my first memory of action figures. I really got into the Hasbros, and I was a big GI Joe guy. So I don't know, maybe I was just part of their customer base. But how did that whole Hasbro WWF relationship come to be, as best you can recall?
When the LJN deal kind of fell apart, I think LJN got a little greedy, and the LJN deal in its infancy was, I think both companies needed each other. LJN was not an established, big time. They weren't Mattel. They weren't Hasbro, and they helped make WWE. I think WWE helped make LJN. So now, they're knocking on their door, and they have a track record. So coming in, it was a matter of the deal was up, and LJN was not in a position to make as lucrative an offer as the other guys.